So this is going to be a very brief presentation on duality. And the reason for it is I started last week with a generic presentation on duality and what it is. And this week, what I offered was to go through one section of the lecture that we're currently studying, which is Pathwork Lecture 181, The Meaning of the Human Struggle, and take a portion of that is about duality and bring it into what I discussed. So I decided to use week 3 of Pathwork Lecture 181, the study guide section of that, because it featured the idea of disunity, inner disunity. Now, when I think of something like inner disunity, I try to think of why that would exist in the first place. What would cause inner disunity at all? And where I go with that is what causes inner disunity is some form of inner knowing. Now, when the lectures mention inner knowing, people have asked quite often, well, how do I find that inner knowing? And I will admit to you that I go a little, I stop because I almost don't know how to answer. And the reason I don't know how to answer is that everybody knows. There is an aspect of being able to operate as a human being that relies on an inner compass, an inner knowing for things. Everybody has that inner compass. They may not use it. They may try to distort it. They may lie about it. But people, over a reasonably short period of time, by the time you're 4 or 5 years old, we know what the truth is versus a lie. We know what fairness is versus being selfish. We may choose not to be fair, we may choose to be selfish, but we know. I teach adults, and adults in the world, they know fairness, they know truth, they know generic right from wrong, meaning positive social behavior versus selfish social behavior. They know sorry about that. They know kindness from unkindness. They know love from hatred. And they even know love well enough to have a little funny feeling when someone's not being really loving. We just have this sense that something's not right, even if we try to accept what they offer or accept who they are. What I am getting at is this is a form of our inner knowing. It's as if it's inside knocking gently on the door, saying, hi, that's nonsense, or hi, that's not what you want. And we hear that inner knowing, which does not tell us what to do or how to do it, simply wants to alert us that something is out of unity. Now, I'm not saying that your inner knowing is all wise and all powerful necessarily. It is, after all, filtering through your human personality, and our human personalities are very, very complex. But what I am trying to describe is we do have an inkling of an inner knowing. And part of this work is to develop a better channel, a better line of communication, so that we can have the equivalent of a conversation between the part of us that knows and the part of us that feels lost or got suckered or got deceived or comes into a very complex social or human situation where they're not quite sure what's going on. So the idea is to be able to access your inner knowing and be able to use that as a guiding light for making your way through the thickets of life. So, inner disunity does result from inner knowing. It results from the fact that there is a positive going on, and what's happening right now makes you aware that you're not aligned with this inner knowing. Now, if you add to that more knowledge about spiritual law, meaning wiser teachings, then you can increase your sense of inner knowing. You can broaden your sense of a larger sense of right and a deeper sense of wrong, so that the inner knowing becomes more and more available on the surface. In week 3, the guide decided to give 3 examples of inner disunity. And I thought I would just go through them and describe them and use that to accentuate, exaggerate, not the right words, to illustrate what inner knowing and what inner unity versus disunity feels like. So one of the first one example that the guide gave was when there is a lack of inner awareness that allows destructive forces to manifest without guilt. Now, keep in mind, these guide sentences are pretty long, so that's what it says. Lack of inner awareness allows destructive forces to manifest without guilt. So when we turn off that inner knowing, or we have numbed it, or we have learned not to listen to it, it allows destructive forces, other influences in our life, other needs, wants, desires, lower self, or even mask self, to manifest without a sense of guilt. In other words, we turn off the warning signals, the inner disunity, and so we can do what we want. And the extreme of that is psychopathic or a sociopathic personality, where they don't hear the inner knowing. They're not bothered by this sense of inner disunity. On the other hand, some people are incredibly sensitive to disunity with their inner knowing, and they go through all sorts of agony because it's not easy to live a pure life. It's not easy to demand every minute of every day be on a clean path based on your inner knowing. We just don't control circumstances that well, and our personality is not that perfect. So we just can't get everything together in real time, in live action, to allow our inner knowing to operate the controls of our life all the time. And we're not supposed to. So you have 2 extremes, a complete disconnect from the inner knowing, and a sense that you're bad, awful, terrible, a disaster, a failure, because you feel the inner disunity exists at all. Both extremes are not realistic. They're not a way for us to manage our lives. So one is going completely numb, and the other is becoming hysterical over every speck of dust, over every bump in the road. And we look for the middle way. So the guide says that spiritual paradoxes always contain truth. So an example is, to the degree the self is already embarked on a positive road, they will experience pain where pangs of conscience and guilt exist because of a temporary negative unity existing. So in other words, it is our very inner knowing and our awareness of it that brings spiritual pain. And in this sense, the guide teaches that pain is just a messenger. That's all it is. And to try to numb or get rid of or to ignore pain is to numb, get rid of, or ignore a message that is important for you to hear, a place where something's not right, something's not aligned. Now, when I think of the word aligned, I'm a kinesthetic person. I feel these concepts physically. And I also feel my way through life physically. So I feel like I mirror the things that I touch. It's what kinesthetic personalities do. And so for me, one of the images I have that I can feel in my body is when I used to play with toy trains as a child. And in toy trains, each car has a truck of 4 wheels in the front and 4 wheels in the back. And they pivot and they fit on the track. And then you get the car on the track and then you hook it to the engine and you hit the electricity and it goes or it doesn't. Now, toy trains being notoriously not fantastic quality, the children's version of that, very often something's not right. And this is how I think of inner disunity. And sometimes it's so wrong that the train won't move, and you have to figure out what's not sitting well on the tracks, especially if you have a number of cars. Please bear with me on this example. If you have a number of cars on your train, any one of those that carry 2 trucks each, which carries 8 wheels each, any one of those could be misaligned and dragging so that the train won't move. And this is how I feel into disunity. So just as a child, when I used to have to figure out, and you'd go down, you'd nudge, and when I got a little bit older and wiser, you go down and you just nudge the trucks and tap and try, and then you'd find the one that wasn't aligned, and you'd hear a little click, or you just sense that that wheel got seated on the track. And then if the engine was still on, it would take off. That was my experience. And that's how I feel when there's inner disunity and you get it adjusted and you find out what it is you're concerned about. It's as if the train takes off. So another example of this concept is that lowly developed individuals suffer little pain when they violate the laws of love and truth. This always enters the territory of value judgments against other beings. Please only hear it as there's a scale. Some people are more developed or displaying a more developed spiritual being in a given lifetime than others. So there is a difference between people, but that doesn't mean they're not all valuable. It doesn't mean they're all not divine. They're just at different stages of development. I translate this into 2-year-olds have the right to live. They have the right to freedom and expression, but you need to contain them because they're only 2 years old. Versus a 10-year-old, which has more freedom and more ability, still needs to be held and contained a bit, versus a 20-year-old. This is how I think of spiritual development, that when we see other people, we're seeing snapshots of their wider spiritual reality based on how they incarnated in this moment. So, lowly developed individuals suffer little pain, and the guide says for the same reason, small children are not always expected to bear the full consequences of their actions. So, a little kid may have disunity, but they've got instinct as well as intuition, and their instinct is to forge ahead regardless. That growth and development of skill building is more important to a 2 or 4-year-old than getting it right. They know that feeling of getting it right, but they can't accomplish it. And I often illustrate this by taking a glass and saying it took some people longer than others to learn to drink out of a glass. And it's a frustrating experience because you spill and people are angry at you and you're trying really hard, you make a mess. Some people just put the glass down. I'll use a straw. And some people are adept at it, and it's an easy process for them. It's different with every single individual. But the kid knows that's what it's meant to do. It sees the adults in its life, and it knows it's meant to do that, and it's going to do that regardless of the consequences. Just like a toddler says, I'm going to walk, and they walk like a drunken sailor, which is admirable because they're walking. And you just have to make sure they don't fall on something. So the idea is when people say, but what about this and what about that? Well, there are different levels of development, and those different levels of development will have different ability to access and act upon inner knowing. There comes a point where you know there's an inner knowing, but you're incompetent to express it and you give up. That's not the same as not knowing. That's just exhaustion and let's get it over with. The inner knowing is still active and you have the sensitivity. Not everything has to be finished on a given day or time. So another example was that a negative unification must be split asunder in order to eventually reestablish unity in positiveness. Think in terms of if you're repairing something like a small broken vase. Let's say you're repairing it with white glue instead of super glue. If you're repairing a vase and you put it together and you don't get it right, and there's just, you knew where the pieces went, but somehow when you put it together, you thought you had everything lined up, and then when it dries, you realize that it's not. Depending on the importance of the inner disunity and the inner knowing, you may want to dissolve that glue and do it again. That sounds like a step back, and it is. It's also important when it matters. The trick is that sometimes the ego gets so involved in the duality of win, lose, success, fail, that it sees a step back as failure. And so it just insists on going forward and insists on saying it doesn't matter. Again, that may work for a while, but the person always knows they were just covering it up to move on. And yet, taking something apart for the 100th time may also be a distraction from what needs to be done. All these things are unique to the individual, and they are unique to the circumstance. I was speaking to somebody a few moments ago and talked about how this can't be prescribed or proscribed for people. It has to be looked at in the moment. Now, there are general categories of things that can be set up in advance, but not the tweaks and the nuances that we work with when we work with adults, increasing their ability to access spiritual inner knowing. So that's about lack of inner awareness. Then the guide gives a second example in this section of the study guide that says partial awareness may lead us to seek acceptable outlet for the destructive forces. Now that sounds like a paradox. Partial awareness will allow negativity. How does that work? And what he describes is the destructive side needs a good cause in order to find an outlet for itself, for hostile activity. So this is a spiritual version of why bad people do good things. So when the destructive energy needs to move, it's easier to move if it can find a good cause to move with. And it may not argue with the good cause, it just needs, I call it walking the dog. It needs to express itself. It needs to do things. It needs to feel its own power. It needs to feel alive. And it will align with good causes. And eventually the destructive or negative aspects of that energy will surface more. And its alignment with a good cause will begin to reveal its true nature. But the point of the example, the way I see it, is this is an example of inner disunity. That just because somebody is working towards a good cause does not mean that negative elements are not involved. Now, other than this lecture, the way I normally describe it is that negative energy loves to hide inside a good intention because we won't sacrifice the good intention and we believe we can manage the negativity if we see it. We may not believe the negativity is there because the good intention is there, as if two things can't exist in the same time space, or we may deny that the negativity is there because we want so much for the good intention to manifest into something. So this is where just because something is good in the moment doesn't mean it will stay positive. It doesn't mean it will stay free of negative influences. And this is how the two meet up. The other thing is that the lower self often attaches itself to higher self-motivated creations because we're less likely to challenge, examine, and analyze good acts. So a master manipulator of people finds areas where it can do what it wants to do without criticism. And therefore it flourishes there, and there has the opportunity to then manifest negative qualities. Now, does that mean that you question every good act? No. I'm going to take this back to where these examples came up in the first place. And that is that these were examples of how we use our inner sense of disunity to determine if negativity has gotten involved with our project. If there's negative energy involved in a good act, our inner knowing is our Geiger counter to this. The third example was that the desire for greater consciousness will lead to new stages of consciousness. And in this section, I think what the guide is talking about is there's a spiral of development. And this is talked about specifically in Pathwork Lecture 9 and 36, which are on prayer and meditation. And that is that we work on something over and over. We get better and better at it until we go to a moment, a point where we drop into knowing. And then the cycle will start over again. So the desire for greater consciousness will lead to new stages of consciousness. But when we go from one stage to another stage of consciousness, it's as if the rules change, the game changes. There's more integrity required. There's more self-honesty required. There's more willingness to confront situations, to stand up for what you believe in that's required at a higher stage of development than a lower stage of development. So at some point, we're very content and competent and skilled where we are, and we enlarge into a new state of consciousness. And humility is very helpful in this work because we may have to start over to some extent. The cycle begins again, so that our inner disunity is even more sensitive and more aware than it was previously. It feels like we've gone backwards, when in reality, this is a sign that we've gone forwards. What the guide lists is increasing awareness and sensitivity to the pain of disunity motivates us to overcome negative aspects and strengthen positive ones. The pain is a message. There's something to be addressed. This leads to greater consciousness and new unifications. When negative aspects are no longer empowered enough to need an outlet, they can be dealt with in a more direct and self-accepting way. Now, I have too many ideas for trying to come out of my mouth at once. Forcing currents is a concept that is very, very well expressed in Pathwork Lecture 77, titled Self-Confidence. And that's in itself a paradox. Why would forcing currents belong in a lecture on self-confidence? The way the guide explains it is the lack of self-confidence is because of how this lecture explains inner disunity, a sense something's wrong. The forcing current then comes in to cover it up, to mask it, to get away from it, to make it work the way it is. So in effect, you've got a square peg in a round hole and you just hammer it in. That's a forcing current. So in this lecture, it's talking about when the negative aspects are no longer empowered to need an outlet, when they're not in a forcing current, they can be dealt with in a more direct and self-accepting way. Negative energy always thinks it's going to be annihilated because it kind of knows it's negative. The idea is not to attempt to annihilate negative energy, but to re-educate it. Not specifically the negative energy, it may be uneducatable. However, your use of negative energy can be educated because you're a human being and you are divine and you have a positive intent in coming here in the first place. You can be re-educated on how to deal with negative energy. And then negative energy just is, and you learn to live with it like mud or dirt or terrible neighbors, where you just don't go there for tea. The guide mentions in this lecture the ongoing spiral of development. I said 9 and 36, but it's 36, which is on prayer. The ongoing spiral of development may often seem repetitive, which may feel discouraging. That's an ego thing. That's just a little pride. That makes the self-will thinks like it's not getting anything done. And it bothers our sense of self-worth. But if you think about your life, you've gone through this many, many cycles, many, many times. Again, a little humility is very useful here, that we need to be realistic about how when we enter a new arena of learning, we have some things to learn. Slow down, listen, and sense it. And yes, it may feel repetitive, but the key is it feels repetitive, it looks repetitive. But on a micro level, you can't repeat anything. Every time an organic being does something, it's different to some extent. Now, I'll give an example of how I memorized this concept. My mother, blessings upon her, she's passed now, was a person who would tell the same story week in and week out, month in and month out, year in and year out, decade in, decade out, my entire life. And at some point you wanted to scream. I've heard this story so many times, I can tell it from memory. When I started Pathwork and read some concepts, I decided to consider that one of the reasons she was retelling these particular stories so many times was because she was bothered by them and she didn't know what it was. So it was like a dog scratching a sore. She couldn't leave it alone because something wasn't right. And I began to listen to my mother's stories with great patience and fascination. And I noticed that the stories were never told the same way twice. They were added to and subtracted from. And I really did feel that I had been correct in my assumption. She was looking for something. She retold the story because it wasn't finished, it wasn't settled. What I'm suggesting is that's what the spiral of development can feel like. We will repeat certain interactions. We will repeat certain relationships because there's something that we need to learn that we haven't learned yet. And we are attracted to it magnetically. Our inner knowing knows there's something here for us to learn. And we want to learn it. But if we close our eyes and just move on intuition and not intuition, sorry, instinct, and start it again without seeing what's different and looking for the missing information, then we will be repeating it more than we need to. And that's how I dealt with a family thing. Still drove my brother wild, but I was fine. Every time she told a story, I would switch gears and I say, I wonder what she's trying to learn now about that incident. Try it, it's interesting. That's different from rereading a book or rewatching a movie because those are written on the page or they're on the frames of the screen. However, your perception of them changes. What you see, what you read, what the word instigates in your brain, in your imagination, will be different every single time, which is my now understanding of why some people repeat a viewing of something so many times. Because the changes that are going on are internal, and they may not be able to verbalize what is going on. So there can be very vulnerable to criticism or mockery, but there's a reason. And so my learning is to attempt to respect what the individual is trying to do, even if I excuse myself from the room. So ongoing spiral of development can seem repetitive. And then the last point is that as human beings, unhooking from negativity can be a daily practice that strengthens self-awareness, self-appreciation, and self-acceptance. This is another element that discourages people. They want to know when they're going to be done. And you're never going to be done. I analogize it once again to, you're never going to be done sleeping. You're never going to be done eating. You're never going to be done breathing. Your heart's not going to stop and say, that's enough. We've oxygenated you, that you should be good for a week. That's not the way organic life works. That our struggles with negativity are with the dust in the air, where you have to just keep cleaning your living space. But instead of getting upset about it or thinking that the dust represents some punishment from the Almighty Creator, you deal with it as the byproduct of a natural process of negative energies. And you can learn not to engage with it and yet move it out of your life. So that is a little bit more information about how unity and duality, the primary lectures on that are Pathwork Lecture 143, relate to the current lecture of Pathwork Lecture 181. And thank you for listening. Take care.